Okay, so now we're going to look at the question 580 markers, still exactly that same structure, 4 PDL paragraphs, PDL plus a conclusion. We need to remember as well that with our link, we're linking back to the question to make sure we're answering it. Okay, so in the period 750 to 990, the Vikings in Britain and France were aggressive raiders and nothing more. How far do you agree with this view? Give reasons for your answer. Okay, as usual, pause the video, give me 2 points to agree and 2 points to disagree. Pause the video. So, picking out the key points of this question, in the period 750 to 990, the Vikings in Britain and France, so the Vikings in Britain and France were aggressive raiders and nothing more. How far do you agree with this view? So it's 750 to 990, Vikings in Britain and France were aggressive raiders and nothing more. My points to agree, I would say that a point to agree they are just aggressive raiders is the brutal raids on monasteries. And I would say the second reason to agree they are just aggressive raiders is the growing pressure on Jarls from the kings. So remember that over time, as the kings start to emerge, Jarls are losing power, and so they want to try. They're desperately going on raids to try and gain power and wealth and the support of their clan. Okay. A reason to disagree, though, that they're not just raiders. We could talk about trade in Jorvik. And we could also talk about the assimilation in Britain and France. Okay, so go on to the next page here. Pause the question. Pause the video. Annotate your question. Write in raids on monasteries, growing power of the kings, and so on and so on. So your 2 agrees and your 2 disagrees, and then write in what you would put. Pause the video. So we've got raids on monasteries for an agree. We've got the growing power of the kings for another agree. We've got trade in Jorvik as a point to disagree, that they weren't just aggressive raiders. And then we've got the assimilation in Britain and France. Again, showing that they're not just aggressive raiders. Key points in the question, 750 to 990. Vikings in Britain and France were aggressive raiders and nothing more. Okay, so firstly we can talk about the raids on monasteries. Well, they would raid monasteries because they are isolated. They know that monks are unarmed. They are full of plunder, gold, silver, religious relics, so full of riches. And then some examples, obviously we've got Lindisfarne, (793). We've got Jarrow the following year. And then in terms of raids on France as well, we've got raids in 845. Just have to check that date. So there's a lot of monastery raids. It does just show they're aggressive raiders because they're deliberately targeting monasteries, particularly on the coast of England, that are weak and that are defenseless. So that would be our point, that they're targeting defenseless and weak targets, and they know that they are full of riches. And you could also argue that they're aggressive raiders and nothing more, because even though the monks are unarmed, they still take many of the monks as slaves. So that's all evidence to suggest that they were just aggressive raiders and nothing more. So the fact the monks are defenseless, they are weak targets, then they know it's full of riches, and the monks are unarmed, and they sometimes take the monks as slaves. You could also add in there as well that they repeatedly do this. It's not just one raid, there are repeated raids on monasteries throughout the period 750 to 990. We've just picked out a few of the key ones. Next one is the growing power of the kings. So we need to explain that over time, in the 900s, kings are emerging. Gorm the Old, and then later Bluetooth, and this is reducing the power of the Jarls. So they desperately go on raids for plunder and glory, which they can share with their men because their power is being reduced as a Jarl because of the new kings, and so they are desperately raiding overseas in order to try and regain some status and wealth. So this shows that they're aggressive raiders and nothing more, because they are desperately trying to acquire power or keep hold of power through violence, through raids, through theft and plunder, in order to keep their wealth and status. Because the new kings are sort of taking away wealth and status from them. So they are desperately trying to acquire and keep hold of power with violence, raids and theft in return for wealth and status. However, a reason to disagree would be the trade in Jorvik. Under the Danelaw, Jorvik thrives. It's a world trade centre. There's trades from all over the world, and we know this from the Coppergate dig. We found silver dirhams in Jorvik from this period, as well as the shoe of a trader from a foreign land. We don't know where, but we know it's not an English shoe, and that was found in the Coppergate dig as well. They even mint their own coins. So all of this is showing that the Vikings, in Britain in this case, they are traders. They are interested in making money through legal means rather than through violence. So as a result, because of this bustling worldwide trade, they cannot possibly just be aggressive raiders and nothing more. They cannot possibly just be aggressive raiders and nothing more. So the trade, they're making lots of money, it's legal, not through violence, worldwide trade, so they cannot just be aggressive raiders. Because they are interested in, and a good word here to use would be commerce. They're interested in commerce rather than violence. Okay, so that's our first disagree point. Again, I'm making sure that my link is linking back to answer the question. Final one is the assimilation in Britain and France. Now, the assimilation in Britain and France, both of them, it happens very quickly. There's intermarrying. They take on local customs. So in France, they start to speak French. In England, they take on Christianity. They have children. And they start to change the DNA of the nation. So as a result of this, they can't possibly just be aggressive raiders and nothing more, because they are actually settlers. They are settlers who are assimilating. They are settlers who are taking on local culture. And so there is an element of acceptance of Vikings in these areas. So they can't just be aggressive raiders, but actually they're settlers. They're blending in, and as I said, they're taking on local culture. So they can't possibly just be aggressive raiders and nothing more, because they're actually settlers as well. Remember, in your conclusion, you need to agree or disagree, and you should have decided on that before you start your answer, and explain why. You don't introduce new content. You don't introduce new content. Instead, make a clever judgment to explain why you believe that Vikings were just aggressive raiders or weren't just aggressive raiders. Okay? Good. Turn back and let's have a look at this next question. Harold Bluetooth was more important than Svein Forkbeard in the development of a Viking kingdom. How far do you agree with this statement? Okay, so pause the video now. I want 2 agree points. I want 2 disagree points, and I want you to annotate the question. Pause the video. Okay, so annotating this question then. Harold Bluetooth was more important than Svein Forkbeard in the development of a Viking kingdom. So it's saying Bluetooth was more important than Forkbeard in the development of a Viking kingdom. How far do you agree? So my points here, I would say that the Bluetooth's conversion to Christianity is a great point to agree, that he was more important than Forkbeard in the development of a Viking kingdom. I think as well his connection of people, or connection of the nation, with the bridge and the moving of the capital and so on, is all evidence to suggest Bluetooth was more important than Forkbeard. But you could also argue that Forkbeard he fought to regain lands. So he fought to regain lost lands, lost by his father and taken by other people. So you could argue here he's the most important in the development of a Viking kingdom. And you could also argue as well his political alliances. The marrying in there is very, very useful for him. Okay, on to the next page then. I want you to annotate your question, and I want you to write down the 4 points. We've got our 2 agrees and our 2 disagrees. Conversion to Christianity. Connection or connecting the nation. And then our disagrees are Forkbeard fighting to regain lands, and political alliances. Okay, pause the video. Okay, annotating the question once again, we've got Harold Bluetooth was more important than Svein Forkbeard in the development of a Viking kingdom. Okay, so there are the key elements of our question. Firstly, let's talk about the conversion to Christianity. This happens in 865. He is not tolerant of pagans. We have the reburial of Gorm the Old at Yelling. We also have the second rune stone at Yelling. And we also have the church built in the centre at Yelling. So this is all evidence. Sorry, I've just 965, not 865. That's my mistake there. 965. So we've got the fact he's not tolerant of pagans. He reburies Gorm the Old in a Christian style at Yelling. He also adds a second rune stone at Yelling, and he builds a church at Yelling as well. So he converts to Christianity wholesale, and it becomes the official religion of Denmark. So how does this indicate that he's more important in the development of a Viking kingdom? So we need to link it back to the question here. Well, this shows that he's more important in the development of a Viking kingdom because by converting to Christianity, he is defending his nation. There have been attacks from the south, from the German lands, because the Vikings were pagan. So by converting, this in theory protects, because the Christian Germans are not going to attack fellow Christians. So he's defending the kingdom, he's developing it, and he is defending it. So that's your argument there. He's developing the kingdom, and he is defending it from the Germans, who will not, in theory, attack Christians, but they would attack them when they are pagan. Another reason you could argue that Bluetooth was more important than Forkbeard in the development of a Viking kingdom was how he connects the nation. He moves the capital from Yelling to Roskilde. Roskilde is more central. It has a full harbour. It allows him to be closer to Norway. He also builds bridges The most famous being the one at Ravening Edge, which boosts trade and connects people. So therefore, how is he developing the kingdom? Well, by moving the capital to Roskilde, he is making the kingdom more secure, and he is also boosting trade and the economy by building the bridge at Ravening Edge and others. So we'll focus on the securing the kingdom first. He's moving the capital to a more central location. So it's a central location, which will mean that it's easier for him to lead the nation. It's stronger control, more secure. So he's developing the kingdom by making it more secure. He also boosts trade and the economy. The building of the bridges allows people to move more freely. So he's boosting the economy and trade. So that is a way that he is developing the kingdom. So they are reasons why he can be more important than Svein Forkbeard, because of what he does there. So he secures the nation, the trade, he moves it to a central location, stronger control, and he boosts trade. However, you could very, very easily argue, and I think I personally would argue, that Forkbeard was more important than Bluetooth in the development of a Viking kingdom. Forkbeard fights to regain lands which are taken away, not just from him, but from his father. Before he's king in 983, he captures Hedeby back from the Germans. He also has lands taken from him by Olaf Tryggvason. Olaf Tryggvason sort of snakes him and takes his lands away from him. In 994, Tryggvason returns to Norway and takes his lands. So we could argue there that by getting the lands back from Tryggvason, he fights Tryggvason to get Norway back. In 995, he also fights Eric of Sweden for Denmark back. So not only is he taking back lands that were his, like Denmark and Hedeby was his father's, but actually he ends up gaining more land as well. He takes over a lot more of Norway than his father controlled before. So the argument here, linking it back to the development of a Viking kingdom, why Forkbeard can be argued as more important is because not only does he regain lands that were previously taken, not only does he regain lands, but also he captures more land in Norway. So he develops the Viking kingdom because he expands the territory and makes it a more powerful group of nations. So it's not only about regaining, but he captures more land in Norway than he had before, so he's expanding and developing territory. The final one is the political alliances. Now, he has a very clever alliance with Sweden. So he has a very clever alliance with Sweden. When Eric of Sweden dies, he marries his widow, Sigrid. He marries Sigrid, and this forms a political alliance, a political bond between his nations and Sweden. And this is significant in developing a Viking kingdom because he is protecting his Viking kingdom from Swedish attack. So he's protecting it from Swedish attack. Because they are not going to attack lands of which Emma is queen. Sorry, not Emma, Sigrid. Not going to attack Sigrid's land for where she is queen. So this develops the Viking kingdom because it is protecting from Swedish attack. It is making it more secure from potential attacks from neighbouring countries. Again, in your conclusion, like we said earlier, you need to agree. Let's move it up a bit so you can see. You need to agree or disagree, and why. And you should have agreed or disagreed before we started. You shouldn't be introducing new content. You should just make a clever judgment explaining why you agree or why you disagree with the statement. Okay, now let's move on to our very final one. Our very final one is this one here. Viking raids on Britain, Ireland and Scotland in the period 793 to 850 were exactly the same. How far do you agree? So Viking raids on Britain, Ireland and Scotland in the period 793 were exactly the same. How far do you agree? So usual drill, agree, disagree, 2 points for each, pause the video, off you go. Okay, so the first reason, let's annotate the question first. I'm getting ahead of myself. Viking raids on Britain, Ireland and Scotland in the period 793 to 850 were exactly the same. How far do you agree? So Viking raids on Britain, Ireland and Scotland. So I know I can talk about Britain, Ireland and Scotland in the period 793 to 850 were exactly the same. How far do you agree? Give reasons for your answer. Okay, so I know reasons to agree. Well, I know that a lot of these raids, they were all coastal raids. They were all largely coastal raids. There were raid places on the coast that were isolated in both Britain, Ireland and Scotland. I also know that they were all similar because they would target areas of wealth or valuable land. However, reasons to disagree would be the Shetland Islands, where the raiders become settlers or settler farmers. And the other reason to disagree would be the long ports, which are created in Ireland. Okay, so turn over the page. Turn over the page to your last one here. Viking raids on Britain, Ireland and Scotland in the period 793 to 850 were exactly the same. How far do you agree? Write in the points and annotate your question. Pause the video. Okay, so annotating our question, Viking raids in Britain, Ireland and Scotland in the period 793 to 850 were exactly the same. How far do you agree? So our points to agree, we've got places of coastal isolation. So that's an agree. We've also got the next agree, which is the targeting of areas of wealth or areas of high land value. We've also got the fact that the Shetland Islands is a disagree, that they weren't all exactly the same, the raids, because the Shetlands, the raiders, become farmers. And then finally we've got the creation of the long ports in Ireland, where they begin to overwinter at these long ports, and then these grow into Dublin, Wexford and Waterford. We'll talk about those a bit later. Okay, so the raids on Britain, Ireland and Scotland in the period 793 to 850 were exactly the same. Well, many of them would target coastal areas, either monasteries or areas of value. So there'd be coastal areas, monasteries. For example, the island of Iona in Scotland. In the 760s, there was vicious raids in Ireland, up the Irish rivers into sort of isolated coastal areas. 793 and 793 we have Lindisfarne. 794 we have Jarrow. So this is all evidence of these coastal raids in Britain, Ireland and Scotland. So now in our link we need to explain how this shows that they're all the same. Well, they are all targeting weak and isolated areas where there would be relatively little defence. So they're all targeting weak and isolated areas where there would be relatively little defence. The next one is areas of wealth and value. So in terms of the development, they would all target places which were high in value. So in England there were many targetings of monasteries. They were targeting monasteries. So examples of monasteries, again, you've got Skellig Michael in Ireland, Lindisfarne. So these are all areas of wealth or high value where there would be plunder, where there would be a reward for them raiding these places. So how are they all the same? Well, you could argue they're all the same because all of them are in search, or all are targeting places of wealth in search of high rewards. So you could argue that they're all targeting places of wealth for the high rewards. In England, they have the smash and grab raids on Lindisfarne. You could argue that they used the long ports in Ireland as overwintering places before targeting monasteries and so on. So, and Scotland, we've got Iona as an example. Okay. So with the link there, why are they all the same? Well, they're all targeting places of wealth in search of a high reward, whether it's in England, Ireland, or Scotland, whether it's a monastery, or whether it's an island. They are all targeting them in search of wealth. However, reason to disagree is to do with the Shetland Islands. Now, in the Shetland Islands, historians aren't sure whether the Picts left or whether they were killed. The Picts were the native people of Scotland, and those who lived on the Shetlands, we don't know whether they left or they were killed. But the raiders, then they don't leave. These raiders become settlers. These raiders become settlers. They use the rich farmland of the Shetlands. So they're not all the same. All the raids aren't the same, because these settler farmers, these raiders become settler farmers. These raiders become settler farmers. They don't just raid and leave. So they can't possibly be all the same, because in the Shetland Islands, this is what happens. They're not all the same. The raiders use the farmland. They don't just raid and leave. The final point is about long ports. Now, in this period 793 to 850, there is some overwintering that begins to happen. In England, it doesn't happen really until after 850, but in the overwintering in Ireland begins in sort of 839, 840. So they begin to overwinter in Ireland using long ports, and these long ports are defensive places, which eventually will become Dublin, Waterford, and Wexford. But other places are in this period are not overwintering yet. England is largely after 850, the raids on England, at places like Jarrow. So, but the long ports in Ireland, they are overwintering in the year 839, 840. And these long defensive long ports that they have created, that they're staying in, become later Dublin, Wexford, and Waterford. So how does this show that they're not? How does this show that they're not all the same? That the raids are not exactly the same? Well, overwintering does not happen in England very widely until after 850, whereas in Ireland, overwintering begins earlier. So overwintering begins earlier. And therefore the raids cannot possibly be argued as the same. Remember, in your conclusion, you need to agree or disagree, and you should have already decided on that before you start writing. You need to explain why, and then you need to make a clever judgment in your conclusion to explain why you agree that yes, the raids were all the same, or no, all the raids were not the same.